sessions.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and mysterious women offering you a ride. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Under the Skin. This 2013 sci-fi horror follows a mysterious woman driving around Scotland and luring unsuspecting men into her van. And that's all I'm gonna say for now, but we'll be getting into details for sure. Under the Skin was directed by English director and screenwriter Jonathan Glazer, who has also brought us films like Sexy Beast, Birth, and 2023's The Zone of Interest. Glazer has also moved between filming music videos and commercials, working with artists like Nick Cave and Radiohead, as well as companies like Audi and Apple. While each of his feature-length films have been pretty different, all of them have been pretty well received, at least critically. Glazer co-wrote Under the Skin with Walter Campbell and Milo Attica, which was based on Michael Faber's 2000 novel of the same name. I haven't read the book version, but I did skim a synopsis of it, and it seems like the film is indeed a much more ambiguous version of the book. If you have read the book before, please let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, as well as the differences between it and the film. And let me just take a moment beyond my initial spoiler warning to say that if you have not seen this film, you should probably just stop now and go and watch it. It's a film that you could possibly hate, but I think it's absolutely worth viewing with fresh eyes, as it's not something you can see for a first time if you watch a recap of it. It's much more of an experience. Alright, I'm done warning y'all now. If you're in, you're in. The film itself has a pretty unorthodox cast, using a lot of non-actors that were just hired on the spot in different locations they were shooting at. The leading role went to Scarlett Johansson from The Avengers and Her, who learned how to drive a van and mastered an English accent for the role. The film does feature several Scottish actors as well, including Joe Sazula from Ned's, Scott Diamond from Macbeth, and Paul Brannigan from The Angel's Share. The film also stars championship road racer Jeremy McWilliams, who gets to show off his skills zooming through the Scottish Highlands, as well as British actor Adam Pearson. He was born with neurofibromatosis type 1, a condition that caused a head injury to a mass with tumors as a child. He's gone on to work with outreach programs to prevent bullying, as well as star in the upcoming film A Different Man. Glazer really wanted this film to feel realistic, so most of these scenes were shot in public settings without permits and without much of a script. Some of the dudes you'll see getting into the vans and talking with Scarlett Johansson did not know they were being filmed and only agreed to having their footage shown in the film after the fact. This was surely a challenge for DP and cinematographer Daniel Landon, who has worked on films including The Yellow Birds and The Uninvited. The score was composed by musician Micah Levi from films like Jackie and The Zone of Interest. And let me just say, this is one of my favorite scores of all time. It's worth watching the movie alone just to experience that. Under the Skin premiered at several film festivals and was a critical success, although it ended up being a box office flop. Many critics found the film to be visually stunning and very unnerving, but some couldn't get down with the meandering plot and total ambiguity of the film. It currently has an 84 and 55% on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as a 3.6 on Letterboxd, so while those numbers are mostly positive, there seems to be some distaste for it. But not from me though. I'll tell y'all right now, I love this movie. I can actually understand if you hate it, but I personally get a lot out of every single time I watch it. It's a weird little piece of filmmaking, and I'm very happy to cover it on the channel, so thank you to my patron Liam for requesting it for me to review. But with all of that said, it's probably time we get started. Maybe don't get in any strangers' vans tonight, boys, because we're watching Under the Skin. The movie opens with a slow zoom into a bright light as we get a taste of the intense sound design. A female voice is going through an assortment of phonetic sounds, seemingly learning how to speak English. The light, which kind of resembles a camera, is placed into a socket. An eye socket, perhaps? A motorcycle speeds through the Scottish Highlands and into the outskirts of Glasgow, where the driver collects a woman's corpse and throws it into the back of a van. Inside a bright white void, the dead woman is stripped of her clothes by a naked Scarlett Johansson, whose character I'm going to refer to as the woman. The woman is pulling a Terminator move and taking the clothes for herself. But it's not until the woman coldly looks down upon her victim that we realize she might not be dead. She observes an ant crawling on the victim, with it presumably holding the same amount of moral value to her. Some lights disperse above an abandoned high-rise, and the woman sets out on her joyful adventure. The motorcycle man leaves her with the van, which we'll be spending a lot of time in throughout the film. She makes her way through a bustling shopping mall where she picks up a few beautifying tricks, as well as a swanky fur coat. She drives through the streets of Glasgow and watches the plethora of lone men walking around, ultimately deciding to follow one. She pulls over and asks him for directions, and the nice young man tries his best to help her. She asks what he's up to, but fortunately for him, he already has plans. She practices her flirting on several more pedestrians, eventually convincing a man to accept a ride home. She asks him about his profession and learns he lives alone, but it seems that she drops him off at home without incident. She picks up another man that night and the two get right to flirting, and this time she brings the bloke back to her place. But instead of a shitty apartment, the man finds himself in a black void, but he's so hypnotized by the woman he barely notices. He follows her deeper into the void as the two undress, and the fella is so eager that he strips down completely. At this point, he begins sinking into the floor like it's a pool of liquid until he and his boner are completely submerged. The woman gets dressed and heads on out to find more victims. She decides to avoid the city's hectic nightlife and heads to the coast, where she observes a picnicking couple as well as a lone swimmer. She chats up the man, who is camping during a solo trip from the Czech Republic, but before she can lure him away, he notices trouble. The couple's dog has been swept out by the tide, and the woman has swam out to try and save it. The man has also swam out to save her, none of them realizing the danger. The swimmer sprints over as both the dog and the woman get pummeled and disappear into the huge waves. He manages to drag the man back to shore, but he's too exhausted to stop him from immediately swimming back out to his death. Damn, that's depressing. The woman approaches and bashes the swimmer's head in with a rock to knock him out. She drags him back to the van while the couple's baby cries on the shoreline. Fuck. That night, the motorcycle man collects the swimmer's tent as well as the towel he left on the beach. The baby gets left behind though. Back in Glasgow, the woman gets catcalled by some drunks and she follows a man walking through a parking lot. She stops when she realizes he's heading into a club, but a group of women drag her inside with them. The woman is not the biggest fan of strobing techno dance parties and attempts to flee, only to run into the guy she was following in a different room. He offers to buy her a drink, and later that night he brings his interesting dance moves to the Black Void. He too gets lost in the sauce, but this time we get to see where the victims go. The man watches her leave as he sinks further down, and he comes across the swimmer. He's, not looking too good. The two share a terrified moment together before the swimmer is sucked right out of his skin. All that's left of him is a perfectly preserved skin and hair suit, which will presumably go to another being like the woman and the motorcycle man. Fuck, I love this shot. We watch some meat go down a conveyor belt and to a colorful laser show. The next day, a man buys a rose for the woman from a street vendor whose injured hand is bleeding all over them. She listens to a news broadcast about the couple who drowned. The husband's body has been found, the wife and baby are still missing, and nobody seems to have noticed the missing swimmer. She spends some time watching the women of Glasgow before picking up another horny devil, and we get a better look at the abandoned home the woman has been luring these men to. She's later inspected by the motorcycle man, who checks the status of our human facade. Later, she trips and falls, and for a moment seems very worried, but it seems her skin suit has remained intact. Her interests seem to be shifting from lonely people to moments of human interaction, and the sheer mass of visual intake seems to be overwhelming her. I'm also certain Premiere Pro hated having to export this scene. That night, she's confronted by a gang of hoodlums, but manages to drive away mostly unscathed. She later picks up a man on his way to the grocery store, and she doesn't seem to understand why her generic compliments aren't having the usual effect and reciprocation. The man says that people are ignorant and he has no friends, hence why he's shopping so late at night. He also says he's never had a girlfriend, and the woman turns to complimenting his hands. She stops the van and asks if he'd like to look at her, and he reluctantly gives her his hand to caress her face. Despite him saying her face was unusually cold, he admits he'd like to do it again. She convinces him to come home with her, and the man pinches himself to make sure he isn't dreaming. We get a glimpse of the woman's true form as they enter the void, and the man seems to be the first to notice how strange all of this is. He chalks it up to being a dream though, and he too plunges into the deep. On the way out, the woman gets caught up in her own reflection, and she takes notice of a fly trying to escape to the light. But wait just a second, it looks like she let the man go this time. He wanders through a field towards town, but the approaching motorcycle does not seem like this will be allowed to slide. He pulls up to the man's home and pops his trunk and kills him off screen just as he's arriving home. Howdy, neighbor! The woman realizes that she has fucked up and flees to a remote area where she is stopped by some incoming fog. She wanders through the vast emptiness until it clears, and the motorcycle man goes on the hunt for her. She's made her way to a restaurant for a tasty looking piece of cake, but it's only now she realizes she can't swallow it. She catches a bus to nowhere, and a man lends his jacket to the underdressed lady. She joins him on a grocery haul and comes home with him. The two watch some Tommy Cooper and listen to some Deacon Blue, and the woman seems to appreciate the rhythm. The man puts her up in a spare bedroom, and that night she admires the intricacies of her body. Meanwhile, Motorcycle Man is called in backup, so there are now 4 motorcycle men on the hunt for her. These two go on a romantic stroll to a legitimate fucking castle together, and that night the woman goes in for a kiss. They go through first and second base and skip straight to fucking Winnie the Pooh style, only there's one small problem. Turns out the skin suit does not come with a vagina, and since she can't eat, I presume there is also not a butthole. Well, since sex isn't an option, I guess the only thing left to do is go be a hermit in the woods. She comes across a logger on her stroll, and his vibes are immediately off. He notes that there are 2,000 miles of forest here, and confirms that she's all alone before heading on his way. Motorcycle Man seems to be on her trail, and the woman takes shelter in a bothy she comes across. She takes a little nap on the cold hard concrete, but her woodland dreams are demolished when she wakes to find the logger groping her. She flees deeper into the forest and eventually comes across his truck, and in her panic she sets off the horn. He chases her back into the woods and pins her to the ground. It begins to snow as the man claws at her clothes, but in the attack he inadvertently rips her skin suit. He runs back to his truck as the woman stumbles away, and at this point she peels the human facade from her body. This is the alien's true form, and she looks at the woman's face as it glitches with fear. The logger returns and douses the creature with gasoline, setting her ablaze before fleeing for good. The woman runs through the woods before collapsing in a clearing, and it seems the motorcycle man was unable to locate her. The woman burns to a pile of ashes as her billow of smoke is lost in the snowy sky to end the movie. And that's Under the Skin. Yeah, I fuck with this one. I love cosmic horror, I love unorthodox filming approaches, and when done well, I love slow burns. This movie is a feast for both the eyes and the ears, but there's a lot more going on than just a pretty surface. There's more under the skin, so to speak. Let me start by just simply breaking down what actually happened in the film, because I've seen a lot of people maybe don't quite get it after the first watch. The woman is in fact an alien. You can be flexible with that term. She could be some kind of Lovecraftian interdimensional creature, a skinwalker, a succubus, or something else, but the point is she was not and is not a human being. She, along with the motorcycle men, have been placed on Earth by their species to collect humans. And it seems like the aliens have identified what communities of people are probably the easiest to take without anyone noticing. One of those populations are lonely men, so they send soldiers, for lack of a better word, to abduct them. They wrap themselves up in a pretty exterior and lure the men into either their ship or some kind of portal where they are kept in an amniotic fluid for some time. This process kind of reminds me of what Buffalo Bill was doing in The Silence of the Lambs, basically loosening up the skin to make it easier to remove. They remove the skin and reduce the innards into a nasty liquid, which the aliens presumably eat. Then they use the skin to craft a new disguise for future farming activities. In this case, the woman does the abducting and the motorcycle man does any necessary cleanup to keep things under wraps. But I'd assume there's also aliens disguised as men who abduct prostitutes and similarly vulnerable communities, as I get the idea that this is probably a pretty big operation and not just one tiny unit working. These aliens view humans the same way that we more or less view ants or cattle. They are simple-minded creatures that there's no moral weight in killing. But the dilemma comes in as the woman begins to identify with her new skin, and she begins to empathize with the men she's hunting. This is why she let the man go. She met somebody that she saw as more than just meat. She began to yearn for the same kind of individuality that she was mimicking. She wanted to feel what the people around her could feel. I really enjoy watching the woman shift from a cold, emotionless killer to something more resembling a human, and it's a horrifying turn to watch her be hunted down in a similar fashion to what she was doing earlier. The scenes on the streets and in the shopping centers throw you into this awful, overwhelming, overstimulating world, and I at least identify with the alien and feeling out of place there. I think the non-actors involved add a necessary sense of reality to everything, and even the actors all blend into each other in a nice way that makes them feel like real people randomly pulled off the street. Scarlett Johansson does a great job carrying this film. She is the one on screen almost all of the time. I think she does a great job portraying this alien as she learns to communicate, manipulate, and eventually feel fear and remorse. But I can admit that the film is very, very slow. I've seen a lot of people discuss how much they hate how long almost every single shot in this film is, and they think it's just hot, pretentious art garbage. But I think the slowness is really important. We are supposed to be seeing our world through new eyes. We are seeing the alien's perspective as she sees all of this for the very first time. And at a time where most of what we get is big, bombastic action with jump after jump after jump after jump of very quick scenes, I appreciate a film that makes us slow down and requires us to digest what we're looking at. That being said, there is definitely some fat that could have been trimmed from the final product. I do find myself the least interested during the third act, at least until the woman gets into the woods. I think the cake eating and attempt at sex are very important to what comes later, but overall those sequences don't grab me the way the earlier portions did. But there are so many scenes in here that I just love. Everything with the swimmer and the baby is perfect. It's a horrifying scenario being observed almost like a nature documentary. And that ending is hard to watch. It's hard to feel for her since she's been killing people all movie, but when you remove that a bit and just think of her as a random woman in the woods, it really speaks to the ever-present dangers that exist for them. The entire basis of this film is based around exploiting a fear that men almost never engage with, but women are almost always aware of. No woman would accept a ride from a stranger in a van, but men would never see a woman that looks like that as a threat. They can't see the strangeness through their own desire. But by the end, we're reminded that we are the real monsters walking the streets. We don't kill each other for food most of the time. We kill, rape, and abuse each other not for survival, but for pleasure or for no reason at all. If some aliens came down to Earth, they'd have to be sneaky. Even if they meant no harm at all, we would kill them. At the end of the day, Under the Skin is a simple premise that is shown in a very unique way. We've all seen alien abductions and of course alien invasion films, but this one tells it from the alien perspective. We don't identify with the protagonist, but we're also far removed enough from the victims that we don't really identify with them either. We become alienated, existing somewhat like the person behind a camera in a nature documentary. And depending on that documentary, we could be swayed to root for the predator or the prey at any moment. It's a strange, slow, demanding film for sure. It requires some work on the audience end, and it certainly won't be for everyone. But it boasts some incredible cinematography, sound design, music, and visual effects. I'd also describe this as a career highlight for Johansson, who fully disappears within the alien persona. If you haven't seen it, I'd say give it a shot, and even if you have seen it and didn't like it, I'd say give it another go sometime. Well, that's about it. Thank you so much to my patron Liam for requesting Under the Skin for me to review. It was really fun to break this film down while also not immediately giving all of its secrets away. But what do y'all think of Under the Skin? Let me know down below. And be sure to join me in 2 weeks as we check out Phantasm 4 Oblivion. Thank you all so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Under the Skin. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.